The war against meat. Are Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods set to disrupt the $1.4 trillion meat industry? Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. This is Jason, certified financial planner and host of Fighting Words Financial. Today we are going to talk about the disruptive potential of plant-based meat substitute companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. And by the end of this video, I think you and I will be on the same page as to where the meat industry is going if we don't agree on exactly who wins the war against meat. Before we get started, please let me remind you to give me an early thumbs up for this video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't done so, please hit that subscribe button. All right, folks, let's get started. I gotta be honest, I never thought that I would be doing a video like this. And let me start by saying that I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, and nor do I subscribe to any sort of dietary philosophy other than the fact that I'm viscerally horrified by crabs. For the foreseeable future, I'll continue to eat meat and enjoy meat. Although, as the cost decline curve continues to accelerate for ground meat substitutes, I'm almost certainly going to adopt them for recipes that require ground meat. And if cultured meat products eventually do taste like the real thing, I might adopt those as well. Now, I've been told that you can't really taste the difference between your basic cheap ground meat and plant-based meat substitutes. And let's be honest, it's not like I'm grinding up dry-aged Wagyu A5 to grill hamburgers. Hamburgers are by definition made from a cheaper cut of meat. I also don't own any stock in any of the companies that I'm going to be talking about today. Although I may initiate positions in the future, it won't be probably in the near future. We live in a rapidly changing world in so many ways, and folks, this really isn't anything new. In fact, you could say that the only constant of human existence really is change. As investors, we have to be attuned to how the world will change generally, even if we can't predict what exactly is going to happen. In this age of innovation, the ability to abandon antiquated systems of thought that you have an emotional or irrational attachment to is what's going to help you to overcome challenges and prosper in the future. It really isn't enough to think of yourself simply as open-minded when it comes to investing. You must realize that at no point should emotion or faith come into a conversation about investing or finances. There really isn't any room for that sort of sentimentality, and sentimentality can lead to very poor decision-making, especially when it comes to managing risk. I have to give a shout out to a fellow YouTuber that I actually don't know personally, Dead Inside. He is absolutely right when he advocates a completely emotionless, machine intelligence-like evaluation of investment choices and risks, and he talks about this all the time on his channel. I bring this up because many people, including myself, have been extremely resistant to the idea that one day people would adopt these meat substitutes en masse. When I stepped back a second to rationally look at why I was resistant to this idea, I realized that the answer was pretty simple. It's only because I like meat. And when I say I like meat, I mean I really like meat to the point where I have, really a hipster-like hobby of making my own charcuterie and European-style dried sausages. But today, I'm really going to take my prejudices about meat and put them to the test. And I'm going to taste test a couple of products right now that I got from the grocery store this morning.
I went to the grocery store this morning and I picked up this pound of Beyond Beef for $7.99. I couldn't find any Impossible Burgers, so I went with this brand instead, Light Life. Never heard of it before, but I am going to try it today. Read the ingredients when I got home. Folks, there's a lot of sodium in this already, so I just added pepper. Threw both of these guys in the pan, and while they were cooking, I started preparing the toppings. Cooked kale, arugula, and tomato. Bam, finished product. Looks pretty good to me.
Okay folks, so the first one I'm going to try is the Light Life burger. It's this brand. Never even heard of it before. Just saw it in the grocery store while I was picking up the Beyond Beef. So I'm going to go ahead and try this. My mouth is watering with anticipation. And it looks nice. It kind of looks like a medium rare burger there. It's got some goodies on there. Let me see. That's pretty good. I enjoy that. Good texture. It's not exactly like the previous veggie burgers I've had. And it's definitely, it's not quite meat though. That's one thing I do want to say. Does it kind of satisfy a protein craving? It does. Is it a reasonable facsimile for meat? It is. But it's not exactly a replacement at this time. It's pretty good, and I think I would enjoy having burgers made out of this pretty regularly. All right, folks, next up is the Beyond Burger. Same thing, it's got a very nice color there. All the goodies on there. Exact same thing, it's just got cheese, tomatoes, a little bit of kale and some arugula and some spicy mayo in there, and let me give this a taste. Wow, that is a much different flavor than Light Life. Much different flavor. Much more satisfying from the first bite. It got a very nice crust on it when I cooked it in the pan. Very satisfying, and honestly, kind of hard to tell the difference between like cheap ground beef and this burger. I'm gonna take another bite though, just to make sure. Yeah, a lot better. It's very satisfying. This can't be vegan. It can't be. No, maybe there's vegans in it. Let me see. No, definitely not. Like I say, that's a Beyond Beef. In terms of quality, in terms of how close it gets to being actually ground beef, the Beyond Beef is a lot closer. And I'm telling you, I can see this becoming a part of my diet once we have price parity with actual ground beef. So honestly, I have to admit to being really surprised here. I was not expecting the Beyond Beef product to be really that close to actual ground beef. The only thing I would say is it's a little bit drier, which means that it has a little bit less in the way of oils in it, which is not all that bad, not bad at all, to be honest. The Light Life product was definitely inferior in a lot of ways. It tasted like beans or pea protein. The Beyond Beef tasted like beef in a lot of ways, maybe just slightly different. It had a nice crust to it and everything. It was a hamburger, and most importantly, what I can say, what I got out of that is satiation. I'm one of those people that's just hungry all the time. And even after I finish a meal, within an hour, I'm hungry again. The Beyond Beef is so close to actually being beef that I'm kind of close to being in a food coma right now, and I want to go take a nap. So my endorsement is that this product is really, really good. So when I take a look at it rationally, I realize that there isn't just a small opening for success as a niche product on the high end of the cost scale for socially conscious vegans and vegetarians. There's actually a yawning chasm of opportunity as the cost decline curve first pushes ground meat substitutes below the cost of ground beef, pork, and chicken, and even greater opportunity one day if cultured meat product cost declines push those products below the cost of producing and processing live animals. Now, it's really hard to set aside all of the ethical and environmental considerations of meat consumption for many people. But I ask you for this video just to consider only the technical and financial issues surrounding the industry. We're going to talk about why this meat substitute business makes sense now and in the future, how the meat industry in its current form could be dismantled, and some of the ancillary effects as the switch to plant-based meat substitutes starts to ripple out into the general public consciousness. We're going to talk about the fact that it isn't these ethical or environmental considerations that are going to disrupt the legacy meat industry, but just like the electric vehicle industry, it's going to be good old-fashioned capitalism and cost declines that does it. The meat industry is a $1.4 trillion global behemoth that for the last 40 years has seemed like an unstoppable juggernaut in terms of its global growth. Back 40 years ago, when the Chinese and Indian economies started to grow and modernize, there were a lot of predictions about how consumer spending habits would change. Economists were essentially dead wrong about how folks in those countries who started to have a little bit of spending money would consume. In the case of China in particular, folks that cut the first substantive trade deals in the 1980s envisioned an economy where a growing Chinese middle class and newly wealthy Chinese people were gobbling up American manufactured products. An American car in every garage, an American steel in every building. This happened to a degree, but not like economists had hoped. Economists were mostly just wrong about the growth of our agricultural exports to China and the growth of consumer demand. It seemed like that the very first thing that Chinese people did with their newfound wealth in the 1980s and 90s was to improve their diets. And for better or worse, that included an increase in meat consumption. It was an increase that actually far outpaced the rapid population growth of China, as per capita meat consumption in this country that was already experiencing exponential population growth increased from about 12 kilograms per person per year in 1980 to roughly 65 kilograms per person annually today. It isn't just China either. Even the country probably most associated with vegetarianism, where there's still a social stigma attached to meat consumption in many reasons, and of course I'm talking about India, they've seen a steep increase in production and consumption of meat as their incomes have grown. This isn't a phenomenon that is limited to just China and India. We can see across the globe that animal protein consumption and GDP of a country are really closely tied. This is very much a human phenomenon. Why do humans love meat so much? Why is it such an important and highly preferred human food? The answer to that question lies in genes. We are simply evolved to crave proteins because they're necessary for life. Now, those proteins don't necessarily have to come from meat, and we don't actually need as much protein in our diets as the fitness or supplement industry would lead you to believe. All we need in our diets to thrive nutritionally is a diet that consists of about 15% protein. And when our diets dip below 15% protein for any extended amount of time, we'll start to overeat in an attempt to satisfy our protein cravings. This has been confirmed by academic research and by experimentation. So meat cravings seem very real to me, but nutritionally speaking, once you're an adult, your protein needs for the most part could be satisfied with bread, peanut butter, quinoa, potatoes, all of which have pretty strong protein profiles. I know a lot of people that like the so-called paleo diet think that it's more natural because our pre-agricultural ancestors ate this way. That's not really true at all, and any archaeologist could tell you that. Some Paleolithic people closer to the North Pole ate enormous amounts of meat, while hunter-gatherer peoples in other regions barely ate any meat at all. So which Paleolithic diet was the most Paleolithic diet? Who really knows? The truth is that meat consumption is connected to a whole host of psychological and cultural issues that can't really be separated from mere nutritional needs. These psychological and cultural issues have evolved along with human societies and have stuck with us in the modern age. Meat consumption is closely tied to ideas of masculinity, power, and wealth, which go far back in our evolutionary family tree. Animal protein, whether it's the steak you grilled on your back porch, a 10-point buck you shot on the deer lease, or that giant fish you posed with in a picture, it's a food unlike any other because, in the wild, it comes in very big packages of protein. You don't get it very often and it spoils very quickly. So quickly that you can't eat all of it yourself before it goes bad, and that makes it the perfect food for sharing. Now, if you have something to share that other people crave, it gives you status. Now, there are entire semester-long courses taught in anthropology departments around the world, but really, that's a whole separate video to go into. We're not going to talk about that today, and maybe it would even be a whole separate channel. Suffice it to say that slabs of grilled protein aren't going away anytime soon, and there is this whole complex web of wealth, cultural, and status issues that has caused the rise of meat consumption globally. Okay, so if meat is so important to human psychology and culture, then how are companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods set to disrupt the $1.4 trillion meat industry? The answer to that question is really in the answers to two other questions. How closely do meat substitute products get to tasting like the real thing? And how do meat substitutes become the product of choice for the mass market? Well, the answer to question number one is that it's pretty darn close. It's not just a reasonable facsimile, it's so close that I'm having a hard time telling the difference between the real thing and the substitute. Once you add spicy mayo, cheese, arugula, kale, and tomatoes and slap that on the burger, I would imagine that you could use this for any recipe that calls for ground beef. The primary obstacle to widespread adoption of plant-based meat substitutes definitely isn't taste, at least not in the case of Beyond Beef. The answer to the second question, how do meat substitutes become the product of choice for the mass market, is surprisingly simple. It's all about reducing the cost of the product relative to real meat. Interestingly, I predict that the cost decline of these meat substitute products will almost certainly follow a similar pattern that made the Model T Ford become a disruptive innovation, that made solar panels become a thing, and the reason why Tesla is leading us toward an electric vehicle future and a sustainable energy economy. Really? Yes, really. If you're familiar with the theory of disruptive innovation, you understand that the answer is Wright's law and declining cost curves, especially once you realize that the plant-based meat substitute industry, unlike real live meat production, is entirely a manufacturing process. Oh, corporate slaughterhouses and meatpacking facilities, they certainly look like manufacturing, and there is manufacturing going on there. They're highly mechanized, although there's actually plenty of manual labor going on at several stages of meatpacking, but that's really only at the end stage of the live meat industry. If you take the cattle industry, for example, before a steer ever gets to the slaughterhouse, they're bred and born on a ranch. They spend months grazing on grass within sight of their mothers, and then at around age 6 to 8 months, they're weaned away from their mothers. They then leave the ranch and are sold at livestock auction markets to stockers and backgrounders, usually sometime between the age of 6 and 12 months. Next, they'll spend another 6 months or so at a stock or a backgrounder farm, grazing on a variety of pastures and gaining weight and converting forage and grass into lean protein. The next stop before the meatpacking plant is the feed yard. They'll spend the next 4 to 6 months eating a scientifically balanced diet, supplemented with grains and designed to fatten them up. They'll receive daily care, but this is the rest of their lives unless they're moved back to a pasture to be grass finished. There are a lot of non-manufacturing people and labor expenses involved in this process. There are the feed farmers, ranchers, livestock auction employees, truckers and herdsmen, cattle feeders, feed salesmen, lab techs, microbiologists, embryologists, nutrition specialists, and veterinarians, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other folks involved in this industry that I missed. This is all before they go to the meatpacking plant, where there's another long list of folks with highly specialized jobs that add to the production cost of meat. This is a very long and complex supply chain that has a ton of costs that can't be controlled by the meatpacking plants, who own the only part of the process that can really benefit from increased manufacturing efficiencies. Basically, humans have been raising and slaughtering animals for at least 8,000 years. The meat industry is a mature industry that is at the end of its cost decline curve described by Wright's law. It will only see small and incremental cost declines, if at all, in the future, even if demand and production increases worldwide. Not so with meat substitute companies like Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods. In this new industry, simple ingredients are grown by farmers and are delivered in bulk to manufacturing plants, and essentially plant proteins, oils, trace minerals, and water are assembled into an animal protein architecture using mostly heating, cooling, and pressure to create layers of fibrous textures and plant-based fats. I am simplifying it, of course, for the sake of time. This is a YouTube video after all, but there are a lot fewer hands in the cookie jar, and it is far less resource and time intensive than cattle ranching. And if I made it sound like an industrial manufacturing process, that's because that's exactly what it is, and therefore Wright's law applies to this process. It's still a relatively new industry, and these companies are still learning how to be efficient, and we are just beginning to see how Wright's law will apply to this manufacturing process and reduce costs over time. If you recall from the earlier video that I did on the theory of disruption, Wright's law provides a reliable framework for forecasting cost declines as a function of cumulative production. Basically, it states that for every cumulative doubling of units produced, costs will fall by a constant percentage. Essentially, the more you manufacture something, the better you get at it, and the rate at which you create cost declines can be predicted. As of right now, the cost of plant-based meat substitutes made by companies like Light Life, Beyond Meat, and Impossible Foods are higher than that of meat derived from live animals. These companies and the dozen or so others out there in the same business have taken the Tesla approach to creating a market for their product. Just like Tesla, they started out at the premium end of the market as a niche product and are working their way down the value chain towards mass appeal as demand increases and production capacity expands. Based on the history of increasing sales and production for the industry, it's evident that customers are willing to pay a premium at present for whatever reason for the products offered by Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger. So just like the cost per watt of solar panels has declined as production has increased, just like the cost per kilowatt hour for lithium-ion batteries has decreased as production has ramped up due to the rise of electric vehicles, the cost of Impossible Burgers will decline as demand increases and production scales. The cost declines for plant-based meat substitutes have actually already started to do just that. It was perhaps even accelerated by the turmoil of 2020 and the increased amount of cookouts and folks experimenting with home cooking as we all sheltered in place. The Motley Fool reported on August 14th a crucial metric from Beyond Meat's their second quarter earnings that may have been overlooked by a lot of folks. The price per pound of their value pack of 10 hamburger patties was briefly dropped to just $5.69 per pound. Just 2 years ago, that same hamburger patty cost approximately $12 per pound. Now, this was a special pricing deal that ran out by late August, but as of late October 2020, the Beyond Beef Cookout Classic Pack can be purchased for around $8 a pound from the Beyond Meat website. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Summary of Retail Price Spreads, the average cost for ground beef as of October 2020 is $4.07. So essentially Beyond Beef right now is about twice as expensive as the real thing, and they're going to need to cut their prices by about 50% just to match the price of ground beef derived from live animals. Now this is also, let me remind you, after a 14% decline in the average price of ground beef just since June. It's really only a matter of time, folks, and probably not that much time before the price per pound of products like Beyond Beef and Impossible Burgers is actually well beyond the cost of ground beef. Based on how quickly the cost of Beyond Beef declined from $12 to $8 a pound, it was basically an 18% decline annually as production increased. It could literally happen inside of 2 years, and I think it's almost certainly going to happen inside of 3 years, and that would be a conservative estimate on my part based on the estimates of production growth. Try to imagine the scale of what we're talking about here. If it tastes just as good as the real thing and the price is lower, what would stop you from using the product? Conservatively, 26 billion pounds of beef was produced in the United States last year, of which 40 to 45% was consumed as ground beef. So on the low side, around 10.4 billion pounds of ground beef was consumed last year to satisfy our meat cravings. Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods only sold somewhere under 50 million pounds of product last year. So even if no one ever considers the ethical issues regarding the slaughter of live animals for food, even without a population cognizant of the gargantuan potential environmental benefits of a mass adoption of plant-based meat substitutes, these plant-based patties are here to stay, and the industry is set to do nothing but grow once price parity is reached with actual ground beef. I didn't always believe that. I really didn't believe that it was possible to make a plant-based burger that tasted just as good as the real thing. Now here's where investing in this trend gets tricky. In a lot of ways, knowing when to cut ties with a philosophy or an ingrained idea that has peaked is more important than picking which future ideas will ultimately be successful. And here's where I want to warn you guys about trying to pick the next winner in this industry. Now, I certainly have my preferences when it comes to taste, but unlike a company like Tesla or Apple, none of the plant-based meat substitute producers has a giant technological advantage over the other. They all mostly have patented plant-based meat structure protein products, specifically food products that have structures, textures, and other properties that are similar to those of animal meats and fats. But patenting a product comes with its own set of risks and isn't the protection that you might think or it once was. The knowledge then becomes public. The growth of the internet and global connectivity over the past few decades has enabled new players who want to compete in the same field the ability to circumvent or reverse engineer patents pretty much with ease. I also don't see any of these companies really having a truly dominant brand either, and really, why should it work that way? I don't buy meats based on brand, I buy meats based on price and quality, so why should I buy a meat substitute that way unless there's really a significant difference in quality? I think that the future of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods remains quite uncertain, and I would be very hesitant to try and select either one of them as the ultimate winner in the war against meat. In fact, I think it's going to be very difficult to pick any long-term winner that will make it out of this period of disruption of the legacy meat industry. There are estimates right now that up to 80% of the top meat producers are already making vegan products, and we can expect more competition to enter the market within the next few years as more and more companies and independent investors dissect all of those existing public patents and try various forms of their own concoctions. Now, the already existing top legacy meat producers don't have as great an advantage in this field as it may seem. Yes, they have money, and yes, they have established distribution networks and established relationships with a huge book of clients, but what they really don't have is expertise. They're not really manufacturers, and that's what the fundamental process of producing these fake meat products is. It's manufacturing. And I fully expect one or more of these large legacy meat producers to not really understand this and fail as a result. Entrants into this industry are also going to have a tough hill to climb. They have to compete and steal market share from legacy meat producers as well as compete against other entrants into the market who are popping up daily with their own meat substitute formulations, and some of them may actually end up being better tasting than the products on the market today or cheaper than what is available today. But even if they have a better product, they're still going to face the challenge of raising funds from capital markets to scale production faster than their competitors, or they're going to get buried. In short, I think that I would personally avoid making a large bet on any individual stock in this industry at this time. I don't think that there's a way of predicting one winner at present. I think the competition is going to be so fierce that it's going to be destructive. I think that it would probably be better to hold a variety of these companies through a sustainable foods or food revolution ETF. And there are a few of these available on the market today, and I expect to see more of them in the coming years. Anyway, folks, these are just my thoughts. Let me know how wrong you think I am in the comments below. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.